often find here at Management One, and one that I hear in my position with the leasing as well, is should I or shouldn't I raise the rents? And so we're going to talk about that tonight and why we feel the way we do about raising rents. And it's not just about Management One earning more money because we get a higher management fee. So there are two sides of the coin. We have those owners that want to raise rents and those that want to raise it way up here to sticker price. And we'll get into that as well. So there's a theory, it is a myth, but there is a myth that raising rents will cause my resident to move. In my many years with Management One, I've heard this more often than not. And so we did a study. We compiled all of the data for the last 3.5 years of why residents are leaving Management One or leaving the property that they're renting. And out of the 355 residents that have moved, 13 or 3.6% moved because we raised the rent. That means there's a whole lot of people that stayed as the rents went up. So I also hear this quote, I don't want to raise the rent during a pandemic. People are without jobs and they can't afford the rent. Well, as Ron alluded to earlier, 96% of our residents are paying rent and they are paying rental increases as they come. And to be honest, they are, with all the subsidies that have been rolling out while this pandemic, a lot of them are actually earning more money now than they were previously. And so here's what we see every single day. And again, I help with the marketing of properties, and I am seeing that properties are renting at an all-time high, and 96% of the residents are paying on time. So we're putting properties on the market higher, hundreds of dollars higher. And this is just one example where we had 200 inquiries in 3 hours. That's not an exaggeration. We were bombarded. I think Tyler was helping us field calls because we had so many calls. And this property rented in 48 hours of hitting the market. So when you choose not to increase rents on lease renewals or as your properties come up for re-rent, you're ultimately robbing yourself of your future retirement. And costs are increasing, some of them 300%. So another project we just recently completed was our maintenance price list. That's a whole nother topic for another day, but I'll tell you right now, if you've been to Home Depot, you know that lumber today is a lot more expensive than it was in 2019 or the beginning of 2020. And that trickles down to landlords when we're trying to do repairs. And there's an increased cost overall in your maintenance, your property taxes, your HOAs. So if you're not raising rents, that money is coming from somewhere. And at the end of the day, it's coming from your bottom line, your retirement or your checking account. So another thing we were talking about is sticker prices. I did have an owner reach out to me recently and said, I looked on Zillow and my property should be renting for $5,000, not $3,000. So we got to have a conversation about sticker price. So have you ever gone to buy a car and there's this price on the windshield? You're not going to pay that. You're going to negotiate for what the car is really worth. So Zillow is similar to sticker price because we don't know what those properties actually rented for. So let me explain this a little bit. With Zillow, all we see is what landlords, property management companies, you name it, actually want to rent that property for. Then that property rents and they slap a rented sign on there. We don't know what that property actually rented for, if it rented for less than, more than. We don't really know because they don't publish those numbers. The MLS, we do have to say what we rented that property for. However, we don't know the qualifications. Maybe they made a deal, they had bad credit, so they rented it at a higher rent rate because it's a higher risk. What we do know is all the studies that we've done, Zillow, MLS, those kinds of sites tend to be about 10 to 15% higher than what a property actually rents for. So if you go on to Zillow and it says a Zestimate of 5,000, your property is not going to rent for 5,000. It'll be about 10 to 15% less, and in some cases a little bit more than that. So we personally will use internal data. Number one, that establishes a guideline. Fair housing requires that we qualify everybody the same. So property A, B, and C, their residents qualified the same, meaning we're not making any exceptions to the rule for rent or security deposits. So then we can complete a CRA based on internal data. We also use a very reputable third-party site to compare our rates to. And we do know for them as well, they tend to be a little bit lower than what we actually rent properties for. So if we're listing a property and it's less than what our third-party site says, we know we should probably increase that a little bit. On lease renewals, so that we can establish a fair market value, there's a couple of things that we have to consider. Number one, we conduct an inspection of the property 90 days prior to the lease renewing. So we're not just going to say, oh, the lease is up for renewal, let's go ahead and renew it. If the resident's not taking care of your property, then that's a red flag. And we may not want to renew that lease. We also look at the amount of maintenance costs that your property has had in the last 12 months. Also, why? Is the resident just a nickel and dime, or are there major issues that need to be addressed at your property? We also are limited by the law. So going back to my property should be renting for $5,000 and it's $2,000 under market. Even if we wanted to raise it to $5,000, we can't. And I'll explain that in just a minute. We are also no longer doing 2-year lease renewals. Why? Because the market is going crazy. And by doing a 2-year lease renewal, we are limiting the amount of increase that we can provide for your property and limiting the amount of money that we can make for you. So here's what the law says. If your property is owned in an LLC, a corporation, or a trust, we can only increase the rent 8.6% annually. That does vary by county. Just so happens the 2 counties that we serve, it's 8.6%. If your property is held outside of an LLC, a corporation, or a trust, so it's just a sole proprietor, we can increase it 10% annually. That's the way it is today. We don't know. We don't know. As the laws change, they can renege on that. So we just have to keep that in mind, right? That can change. So at the end of the day, should you raise the rent? In our opinion, the answer is yes, because of all the things that we've stated here tonight. Repairs are going to happen. Improvements are going to need to be done. It's just like on your personal home, right? We've all had to have a water heater go out. We've all had an AC go out. If it happens in your personal home, it's going to happen in your rental property, your investment property. So those things are going to happen. And remember, residents will move out 5 times faster if you're not improving the property as it goes along. So that's the end for me. Do we have any questions for tonight?
I just want to add on a couple of things. One is, in that study we did over the last 3.5 years, keep in mind 1.5 years of that was during COVID-19. Okay, and so people still went ahead and paid the rental increase, because once they find out, a lot of them aren't really knowledgeable what the market has done. They just go to work like everybody else. You're not in that zone. But as soon as they go into Zillow and they look and see, oh my gosh, if I had to move, I'd have to pay over double what they're increasing, it goes away. So the question is always, well, how do we convince them to go ahead and pay the increase and stay? And that's how we do it. Because as soon as they see it increases on Zillow or MLS or whatever, then immediately they go ahead and comply and stuff. So, but the rental increases, I'll get into that a little bit in my part of the webinar tonight. But just let me say this, it's imperative that you raise that rent, because those repairs are coming and they're going to be a lot of money. If you don't take care of your property, I mean, you get ready to sell it. We just had one owner who'd been with us for 30 years. We manage the property. It's a property in Corona, and basically they put a ton of money into it, but they haven't been improving it over the years, okay, structurally and everything else. So we don't want that to happen to you, okay? And we want your rental property to pay its own way, and it can. And without going into detail, that's what we talked about 3 or 4 months ago when I talked about making sure that you raise the rent and making sure whatever money you're saving on your income taxes, because you own that rental property, or two, that you put that money back into your rental account, because those improvements and repairs, they're on their way.
Yes. Thanks for that addition there, Ron. And so we do have some questions. One gentleman is asking, what about residents that have been there a while? Should we stay month to month? And then what happens if they're not paying due to COVID? So that is a loaded question. Again, we're limited by what the law says right now. So we can only accept partial payments. So 25% unassigned declaration. That's what the law says that they can pay right now. In terms of lease renewals on people that are behind, technically, we are not renewing for another year. It stays month to month. We can enact a rental increase, and they're just going to owe more money. And so unfortunately, that is all we can do right now under the various laws that have been coming out and down the last few months. And it's going to change again because the moratorium was extended to the end of September. CDC is pushing to extend it some more. So there's going to be a lot of hoops to jump through. And so, yeah, unfortunately, we do have those that are taking advantage of the situation, and there's absolutely nothing we can do except for continue to try and collect the money and encourage them to apply for rental assistance as it's available in their areas.
In fact, let me that, because we just got in a couple more big checks, 13, 14, 15,000, where owners were made whole all the way through, one of them all the way through the end of this month, and they were behind several months. So if that should be the case, you go to your lender, you get a forbearance, you push your mortgage payments out, okay? And then we go to work on the back end, which is a lot of work, ladies and gentlemen. It's a tremendous amount of work that our county department has. It isn't one phone call. It's phone calls constantly, not only to the resident, but you, the owner, also to our attorneys. You know, it's just like, it's nonstop. It's mind-boggling how much time, effort, and dollars are thrown towards that. So if you should fall in that area, there is hope and there is light at the end of the tunnel. And we've collected well over 100 or 200,000 for owners under these programs already. So just so you know.
Yes. Okay. So if we didn't get to all your questions, just so we can be mindful of the time, I will, myself or any one of us here on the webinar tonight will be in touch with you tomorrow to answer all those questions. I'm sorry, Christy, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to reiterate and ask again, because I know some people haven't been in all the webinars. Okay, so you cannot give them notice while they are in this process and to move out and get a new renter, correct?
That is correct.
Now, when this moratorium expires, would you be able to immediately give notice?
Currently, no. So there was a law that went into effect in January of 2020, and that is AB 1482. And it includes a clause that is called the just cause eviction, even though you're not evicting. And that was prior to COVID, and that's not going to change. As it stands right now, they do not have plans on changing that. So what that means is there are certain instances that you can give notice. And I just talked to our attorney on this today. But, you know, 3,000-foot explanation is you can ask them to move if you're going to sell, if you or a family member are going to move back into the property, or if your property was condemned by the health department and you need to do renovations. Those are the only three things that can allow a resident to be given notice to vacate. You can't give notice because you don't like the resident or because they're not paying. We can't do that anymore. And that was pre-COVID. And like I said, right now, as it stands today, that law isn't going to dissolve once COVID goes away. So we're still going to be under those guidelines.
Okay. Everything is subject to change, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, we really don't know. And if you think it's tough for you, it's tough for us as well, because we live with this stuff daily. I mean, it is more than we've ever seen in 36 years in this industry. So, but we'll come out of it. But it's going to be a little bit longer. So, okay.